Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just, and with me today is author extraordinaire, Mr. John Cameron. John, Seattle is finding out reality kind of bites. The Seattle minimum wage.
Again?
Yeah, again. Imagine that. Maybe one of these days they'll actually learn a lesson. But their minimum pay ordinance on delivery driving services, right? Which is essentially gig workers, Amazon drivers, you know, the food delivery, people that bring us our food when you don't feel like going someplace. So now the minimum wage laws, it's a complicated set of algorithms, essentially. Complicated formula.
Theirs is?
Yes, but it essentially it balances out to about $26 an hour for a delivery driver.
Okay.
So, which means that the service charges for delivery drivers had to go up, and the restaurant charges had to go up. So what's happening is no one's ordering delivery food anymore. So instead of helping these delivery drivers, what has actually happened is they're now unemployed, or they have to work outside of the Seattle city limits, which has now seen a flood of drivers, which means you work less.
I'm shocked by that.
You know, it's like, how could somebody have predicted this, John?
Oh, wait, didn't we?
Many times.
Many times. So the whole thing about minimum pay ordinances, basically they harm the people they're designed to help. So jobs like that, like food service, servers, waiters, relatively unskilled jobs, are entry-level jobs so that people can learn work ethic, learn organization, can pad their resume so they can ask for another job. It's basically an apprenticeship for a lot of people, or they have another job and they need to supplement their income, or they have the means to just work part-time, and they want to work, you know, like me, I'm self-unemployed. That's what my brother invented, that phrase, or stole it, and I like it. As a writer and consultant, you want some freedom. So what setting any kind of minimum pay does is it takes the market out of the market. It takes the invisible hand of capitalism out of pricing labor. And you know, it's just anything the government tries to control, especially commerce, ends up worse. Look at Cuba, look at Venezuela, look at Seattle, right? And we knew this wasn't going to work, and we knew exactly what was going to happen. And the same thing's happening here in California with the fast food laws. Yeah, the fast food law.
They're essentially now they've pushed about, I don't know, a third of the fast food workers out of a job.
Right, and they're going to be...
all the pizza, what is it, Pizza Hut, or was it Straw Hat? One of those two. They essentially fired all their delivery
Domino's.
drivers.
Was it
wasn't Domino's. It was one of the others, Straw Hat.
They fired all their delivery
drivers, and now they're just going to use the app-based drivers to do the delivery work.
And so that was like 7,000 people lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And now instead of being employed by a company, now turned into gig workers, which is the reason all of this stuff is in place, is to convert people from gig workership to employees, because that way they can unionize them, they can tax them at a higher level, and all the rest of that. So once again, this is done just the opposite of their intent.
Well, no, it's exactly their intent. Their intent was to destroy the gig economy. That was the desire. And so
their stated intent.
Yes, their stated intent is to help
people out. Go ahead.
I'm an ex-gig worker, and the only reason I'm an ex-gig worker is because the state of California.
Because you got a job.
Well, I wasn't looking for one, John.
Yeah, the job found you.
The job found me.
Yeah.
But really, the only reason I was even open to it was because the state of California has made being a gig worker unprofitable.
Yeah. Well, only for gig workers that don't have good lobbying organizations, like I've talked about ad infinitum on the show. You know, the idea that they have this 5-point plan to decide whether you're a gig worker, and it's, you know, basically one of the big prongs of the pitchfork that they've killed people with is that you have a lot of freedom in your job, and you're not required to do certain things in a certain way. And it's two of the biggest industries that are required to do exactly things in a certain way by law and regulation are the insurance industry and the financial industry. the medical industry, the dental industry, and all these people are gig workers, and they are required to follow way more rules than you ever did when you were a gig worker, yet somehow magically they don't have to do it. Architects, you know. So you just got to make sure that you bribe the right people, and you can go back to being a gig worker.
Yeah, but that's the problem, is gig workers, by their independent nature, don't want to be under somebody's thumb. So they don't gather well and activate for themselves.
Same problem with libertarians.
It's the same problem. Well, we're going to talk about a problem of people not understanding the economic repercussions of potential policies. Democratic Representative Barbara Lee, in a Senate debate last week, or 2 weeks ago now, she calls for a $50 minimum wage in California because it's so darn expensive to live here in California. That, you know, we have to raise the minimum wage to $50 an hour.
Did she like a Harvard grad or a Stanford grad?
I don't have the slightest idea, but I don't think she graduated from the rule of reality.
Rule of reality, yeah. So if then a minimum wage job is $50 an hour, well, first of all, they'd all disappear.
Yeah, anything.
Right.
Well, most of them disappear, and then every job is a minimum wage job. Anything that now pays under $50 an hour simply becomes a minimum wage job.
Yeah.
If they can employ you at all.
Yeah. Which the chances of that happening are pretty slim. If you're running a small business, let's say a restaurant, where your net margins on food are about 5%, right? Something like that. I mean, coffee is better, you know, bars are better because your net margins are way higher. But it's impossible to make up, if you employ human beings, that margin without raising prices if people impose a non-market rate on your business. It's impossible. You can't employ people. And you know, just to give you an example of what's happening, 20 years ago, I think my mocha was $1.80, right? Now it's $7 because of a lot of that is because of minimum wage laws in the state of California.
And let's remind you, your computers and your phones are actually cheaper than they were
by far.
30 years ago, but that's because robots are making them.
Well,
that's a largely automated process now. And
yeah.
And so pretty soon your hamburgers are going to be made by robots.
And the fact that it's completely unregulated. Well, except in the EU, where you can't have you have to have a consistently the same charger consistent all over all phones. But just to give you an example, folks, I paid 23 years ago for one of the first color laptops you could get, a Toshiba, $1,800. And I think it had 2 meg or 1 meg of RAM and like a 50 meg hard drive, and the batteries lasted about an hour. So I had to buy a battery charger, and I'd take a spare battery with me when I went to a coffee house. And so if prices would have continued to increase according to inflation for that product, it would be about $5,000 now for a laptop. And I can get a Mac Air. It sounds like I'm doing product placement here, huh? I can get a non-Windows operating system machine that outcomputes old mainframes from IBM as of 15 years ago for $900.
Yeah, I mean, remember, in the 70s,
which is about $60 from 20 years ago.
A VCR was $1,200.
Yeah.
Yeah, and nowadays you can get any type of entertainment device for that, essentially.
No.
Yeah,
nice big screen TV.
Yeah, and take care of all your needs. Now, Richard, I had a chance to speak with our friend Richard Fields the other day.
Mr. Fields?
Mr. Fields.
Yeah.
And he had some interesting things to say about Canadian speech laws. About how Canada and California seem to be a harbinger of things to come. So we might want to find out what Richard sees coming down the pike.
I always want to find out what Richard has to say. And I'll look right over here, hopefully, to be able to see that.
This is Richard Fields with Report from the Fields. Like California, Canada has become a harbinger of bad political things to come. When truckers were protesting the COVID lockdowns, the reaction of the Trudeau government was to lock down the bank accounts of the truckers. denying them access to their own money. Now, the left-wing New Democratic Party MP, Charlie Angus, has introduced a bill, C-372, that would outlaw telling the truth about fossil fuels if it differs from the government's preferred climate change narrative. The law would ostensibly outlaw marketing strategies which, in the government's view, trivialize alleged climate-altering emissions and health hazards caused by burning fossil fuels. It would be illegal to make the truthful statement, for instance, that burning natural gas produces less pollutants than burning coal. Penalties would be severe, up to $1 million in fines and 2 years in prison. The precedent for this approach is 1970s legislation that ultimately banned tobacco advertising on broadcast media. That approach was a clear violation of the right to free speech then. And this legislation is a brazen violation of free speech once again. In the 1970s, advertising that claimed one brand of cigarettes was safer than another may or may not have been true. In a civilized world, those who disagreed with that claim would make a counter-argument. That's free speech. The ultimate result for those listening to all these arguments would be, hey, maybe there's something to the argument that smoking is not a very healthy habit, and maybe I should quit. Millions did, with very little credit going to the cessation of TV ads by the Marlboro Man. The geologic record over millions of years is unequivocal. The climate changes. Glaciers once covered most of Minnesota, including the farm where I grew up. Now they don't. They receded long before the industrial age increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. Does carbon dioxide accelerate the process of climate change? I don't know, and neither do the so-called climate scientists with their faulty climate models that have been predicting disasters that should have already occurred multiple times. What is unequivocally true is that civilization as we know it could not have developed without the use of fossil fuels for heating our homes and powering our industry and transportation. It's still an open question whether solar and wind-generated electricity can replace fossil fuels while maintaining our current level of economic progress and prosperity, but I doubt it. In the court of public opinion, it's highly likely that the panic-mongering climate change partisans are in the process of losing the argument, hence the need to control the narrative. If your narrative won't stand up to common sense and truth, those who believe in winning by any means necessary will decide it is necessary to prevent the telling of truths that do not support their narrative. In a democracy, that means capturing control of the means of communicating to a larger audience, including books, mass media, and social media. The quickest way to do that is to capture control of the government and make it impossible for those who disagree with you to have a platform. And that's why we have those who control the government in Western democracies waging a war on malinformation. Malinformation is just truth that they don't want to hear and for sure don't want anyone else to hear. That's this week's Report from the Fields. See you again next week.
Thank you, Mr. Fields. I always love hearing him talk, especially about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I'd like to go off on a short rant on climate change. So, Feynman, who died in the 80s, I wish I would have met him, was a famous physicist, and he said, I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. and this was a physicist. If you ever want to, there's a wonderful 7-minute audio of him talking to a class and talking about the scientific method that's both spot on and hilarious. So, basically, he would have been aghast at this, the idea that you can't publish a differing opinion or even a true opinion. And then whenever, if anybody wants to ever sit and have a conversation with me about climate change, I'll go ahead and give you which I think is false information, that says that carbon dioxide, the tiny bit, 200 parts per million increase is having a major impact on climate. But I'll just go ahead and give you this. If you can answer this question, and the camera's right there. This is my question. Where is the rest of the heat going that is caused by man? And this is what I'm talking about. 3% of the Earth's surface is covered by urban areas. Urban areas are 10 degrees warmer than rural areas. There is enough wind power in the world, even though there's a huge amount of wind, to have a statistically significant effect on prevailing winds. And reducing prevailing winds increases temperature. Solar panels, there's enough of them on the planet with an albedo that is huge. Look up the word albedo before you have the debate with me. To have a statistically significant increase in surface temperature. There are enough roads with the same albedo as solar panels to also have a statistically significant influence on world temperature. These are not things that should cause temperatures to rise, as is purported to be carbon dioxide. These are things that measurably do cause temperatures to rise. So if your models on CO2 are correct, where's that other ½ degree centigrade going that is proven to happen by all the things that I just mentioned? I'm done now.
All right, and all I've got to say on this issue is those who try to silence others never end up being the good guys. They may start out appearing to be good, but they'll never end up being the good guys because they will always impose their worldview on other people. It's just how it goes.
Imagine that.
Which brings us to our next subject, woke kindergarten. What was it, Glasbrook?
So the same kind of thinking that we were just talking about, but only in kindergarten.
Yes, Glasbrook Elementary School, and there's actually an update on this just from this morning. The school district has closed the woke kindergarten because it failed their students. The students' scores didn't actually increase, but what had happened was one of the teachers in this elementary school at a school meeting had said, I'm not sure this is actually good for the students, and they got suspended for it. So a teacher, questioning whether...
Well, didn't he also publish the what do you call it, curriculum? Didn't he also?
Yes, he also,
published what they were teaching them.
But this is the thing.
Revealed it.
Yes, well, he didn't really reveal it. They had those videos that told them exactly what people were doing on YouTube. They weren't actually hiding it. No one was paying attention. And as soon as someone paid attention, people looked at the results, and the results were awful. Which, of course, anytime you politicize education, guess what you're going to get? Awful education. It's just the way it goes. And there's no way around that. Anytime an activist gets a hold of anything, that activist...
A radical.
Any activist, I don't even care if you're a radical, it's the narrow mindset of an activist doesn't allow them to have a representative view on a holistic approach on something, especially something like education. When those students who aren't going to perform well under this, they ignore them. I will make them fit, which has been the one-size-fits-none on education system that we've talked about. I think I stole that from you, John.
I'm sure you did, but put it out there. Just give me credit if you find a way to monetize it.
Oh, sure.
Give me a little credit.
Yeah, we will find it. Of course, clearly. So the woke kindergarten program is now over and done with. My question is, how did it ever get started and begin with? I mean, they literally called it woke kindergarten. I mean, you can't get more obvious that this is a politicized education than by calling it woke kindergarten.
Well, I think that people are in their own little silos so much that they lose touch with reality. If you're talking to your friends and they all agree with you all the time about everything, then if let's say they say it's meteorite's going to hit the Earth tomorrow. Oh, we should go ahead and kill ourselves and poison our children so we don't have to suffer through the aftermath of that. And it doesn't happen. I mean, if everybody that's around you is constantly talking about it happening, unless you reach outside the silo you're in, you're never going to discover anything new. The thing about libertarians is that we have to go look for information outside the silo all the time, because all the stuff in the silo that everybody reads is in agreement with all this crazy stuff. I mean, how could you possibly think that teaching basically a political viewpoint to kindergartners wouldn't, even if you were teaching them what they need to do to read and write and all the rest of the stuff that kindergarten needs, wouldn't interfere with the total amount of time available to teach them? I mean, that's the most basic form of logic would show you that the system's going to fail.
Yeah, the system is going to fail. Now let's talk about another system where we've got some time. Hawaii doesn't think the Constitution applies to it. It's just decided that the Hawaii Supreme Court decided that the recent rulings by the United States Supreme Court don't apply to Hawaii. That they can still pass their anti-gun laws, and they can still, and it's still constitutional despite the clear dictates from the United States Supreme Court. And so we have more and more of both the left and the right wing, the right wing and the left wing are acting very, very similar. Which is not a surprise to us, is it really?
That's because, again, radicals are they're in charge of the duopoly that self-names itself liberals, which they're not. Look up the definition. And the branch of the duopoly that calls itself conservatives, which they are not. Look up the definition. So, we, ladies and gentlemen, the thousands of you out there, and thank you for the calls and letters, we actually do a little research before we get on the show, although sometimes it might not sound like I do. And what's really interesting about what's happening in Hawaii is they say that, the Constitution is, based upon precedent, what the morals of the day, the mores of the day when the Constitution is written. So we're interpreting it because the mores of the day in Hawaii were basically that firearms were not available to people. You couldn't have guns. So based upon that kind of logic, then we could go to places where cannibalism was practiced and say we can now do cannibalism because cannibalism was what happened in the day. The logic behind that's crazy, and what's going to happen is that the Supreme Court is just going to come in and say, no, you can't. It's that simple. You can't just decide not to pay attention. Now, one of our fearless leader decided that on subject of student loans that he was going to completely ignore, but that's a discussion for another time.
That's a discussion for last week.
Yeah. We have a time machine in this building, folks.
So while we've got a few minutes left, we got like 3-4 minutes left. California's war on plastic bags has backfired. Again, another thing we predicted. That they made us use these thicker bags, and I can know myself, I never remember bags, so now I just end up with a whole bunch of these thicker bags.
And then you throw them away.
Running around.
Yeah.
And we put them in the recycle bin, of course, but still, you're not actually saving anything. And they're actually too thick to use for things like the bathroom trash can, which we used to use those bags for. And so, again, these central planners thinking that they know best for everybody has actually made the situation worse. And so what are they going to do? They're going to make it worse again. They're going to try to ban the thicker plastic bags. So we're just going to ban plastic bags altogether. So when you have to walk home in the rain carrying a paper bag, you're just out of luck.
Well, no, you're going to be punished for not remembering the bag that you bought at.
What if you're a neurodivergent person and remembering a bag is just not possible? You're just not going to do it. It's never going to happen.
Well, then we'll have to have all of our food delivered through, oh, no, we won't be able to do that because we can't have delivery drivers because the minimum wage is $50 an hour. I think we're just going to have to grow our own food. Oh, wait, you can't have pigs and chickens Well, you can have chickens, but not roosters. Well, you certainly can't
Well,
have pigs.
hey, John,
There's
there
no
was-
solution. We're all going to have to starve to death.
A month ago, there was an article that came out that said home gardening is a threat to the environment.
Of course it is.
So you gardening in your house, growing some peas and vegetables and cucumbers that nobody eats, is a threat to the environment because...
But we grow them because it's the only thing that will grow. And the eggplant. I can grow more eggplant than anybody could ever use. But the stuff I want to eat, can I grow that? No. You know who eats that? The rats, because I live by the river.
So, hey, so you're helping feed the rats, I guess.
Yeah, they don't need any help. They're opportunistic eaters.
So we've got one more story. The EU it's not about to collapse. Well, from this article, it's about to collapse, but it's actually worse. The EU it's essentially East Germany now has essentially invaded all of Europe, from my humble opinion. It seems more to be a bureaucratic state than it is any form of democracy or anything else. It's just a pure bureaucratic state.
And people are rebelling. And anybody who builds something or grows something or transports something or is rebelling, because you can't just make stuff up and put rules in place that go against nature, basically. I mean, you know, like in is it Denmark, where they're trying to get rid of farms and all the rest of that, and
Denmark,
France, they're trying
Germany,
to do that.
all these places
Well,
are trying to
see,
get rid of farms.
The French have been fighting well, that's because the Belgians run the EU, because it's in Brussels. Have been fighting this from day one. France has supported their farmers basically through subsidies forever, and their farmers are very powerful and they're politically powerful, and they've hated the EU since it first started, because they can't do their pâté, they can't do all the stuff they love because it's not healthy and it's cruel and it's not sanitary. Yet the French live longer than an awful lot of other people.
Yeah, and they're going to have some economic issues because Germany, something that we don't know here in the United States, Germany's in a recession.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an unspoken about recession. And Germany is the economic engine of the EU. And so when all of those small little countries who have been feeding at the trough of Germany.
And their trotters in their trough.
And now what happened?
Excuse me.
All right, we're just about out of time, John. I want to thank you for being here with me tonight. You got any 30 seconds for something last? No?
I have hope. I have hope. I think people are, you know, the idea of a third party in this country, people are realizing that you can take the best parts of the duopoly, throw out the crap, and have a good government.
Thank you, John. We are out of here. Thank you, everybody in there, for working hard tonight. We want to thank you for watching.
Bravo.
Please remember to love everybody and have a good night.